Good morning, this is JColucciello, and we're going to spend a few moments today talking about immigration and industrialization in the early 19th century. As technology evolved and machinery was built, it enabled workers to be able to produce more, sometimes better, but definitely faster. It required less labor to do so, and we were able to get a product typically in a faster environment. Unfortunately, there were some changes that came with this. As a result of these machines needing to be powered, sometimes by electricity, but oftentimes by water, this necessitated workers coming into a workplace, into a factory, where previously they had been able to do this in their own environment, wherever that may be. As skilled laborers left England and came to America, often illegally and under subterfuge, they actually started to duplicate the machinery and oftentimes work to actually improve it. An example of duplicating was Samuel Slater. He left England in 1789, and when he came to Rhode Island, he actually worked with Moses Brown and William Almy to create the Slater cotton mill. Another example of this is actually Francis Cabot Lowell. Interestingly, in 1810, he was able to get a tour of British textile mills under the assumption that it was just a casual tour. What he did, though, is every night when he went back to his lodge, he actually, from memory, drew out the machines that he saw. He then came back to the United States and worked to actually design a higher efficiency cotton spinner, as well as a new powered loom. Given the size of the machines and the space that was needed and the money that would be needed to actually purchase those machines and build those and house those, he actually created the first incorporated mill in the United States. This is with the Boston Associates. As they began to grow, they actually started to see profits of about 25%. And so this stimulated continued further growth with bigger and better machines, bigger and better factories. Over time, they actually needed to move, and they moved to a location between the Concord and Merrimack River junctions. This increase in the population, specifically in that location, to actually allow for workers to populate the mill, is significantly increased over the next decade. For instance, in 1826, the town population was only 2,500. As the mill continued to grow and production was encouraged and spurred on, in about 10 years, in 1836, the town population had actually grown to 17,000. So this industrialization spurring on these workforces and these factories actually helped increase the town's growth. As these companies grew larger, unfortunately, this started putting more and more demand on the workers to produce more and to do it faster. Because the workforce was growing, more management was needed, and this is where we start to develop some industrial discipline. These are the things that then became handbooks and employee handbooks and rules and disciplines and corrective action, and even set working hours. Unfortunately, at the time, those work hours were often long, and the laborers themselves were not the primary concern of the owners of the company. And this began to necessitate some companies and some groups that worked to actually institute labor laws and create guilds and unions that looked out for the workers' needs and the workers' rights. These guilds and unions, unfortunately, did not really gain notable success until the late 19th century, but this is where they started to occur. Interestingly, around the same time as immigration is increasing, especially in these cities that are showing up around these mills, we have a combination of urban migrants who are poor, they don't have any money, they're not merchants, but they are able to do labor. And you end up with a bunch of poor immigrants that are residing in these close communities, often sometimes out of necessity, in overcrowding in houses. If they were able to have their own house, it was typically poorly built, did not have some of the basics functions such as toilets and running water and ventilation. Adding to that the overcrowding, trying to get as many people in a single space as possible to cut down on expenses, we started to see some things in the towns that relate to overcrowding. This includes an increase in population, pollution, illness, general noise in the area, sanitation issues, traffic jams, and slums and ghettos started to pop up. One interesting thing that is a good thing is that we started to see defined areas of ethnic heritage. While that's great for us at this time and we enjoy the benefits of that now, at that time it created some segregation and some isolation, and there was one group fighting against another group, and the Italians would fight against the Irish and so forth, and that created a lot of controversy in a small confined area, which is, as we know, not typically a good thing. And so there were issues there. As migrants started to expand and populate out, there were some similarities and some differences. Some of the similarities are that related to Oregon, specifically in Texas and California, that these expansions typically started with fur and trading opportunities, things that would lead to economic growth. And as they found that there was economic potential and opportunity there would then follow settlers and people that were going to actually create towns and so forth. When we look at some of these items, the differences themselves are somewhat in more of an abstract thing. Some of the focuses of the communities were different. Whereas Oregon and California formed around trading and economy, Texas towns at this point had been around missions and had been with the guise of converting the indigenous population. As they started to develop their own economic growth opportunities, Oregon definitely went to more of a fur trading component, whereas Texas stayed with the agriculture and the farming. California really began to explode under the gold mining opportunities. Another interesting thing that kind of differs from Texas versus Oregon and California is that Oregon and California definitely recognized the need for good relationships with the established community in order to have longevity and success long term. They accomplished this by starting to create good relationships with the indigenous people and the previous settlers, whether they were from Britain or Spain and so forth. They did this partly by either marriage into the tribe or marrying daughters specifically of local families and creating that relationship and that shared investment. Whereas Texas did not. Texas continued to really focus on trying to convert everybody else and trying to look at a more dominant side. That created a whole bunch of issues that for a good time, the Tejanos, the Spanish Tejanos, were fighting the Comanches, trying to convert them. And then the Comanches were fighting the Tejanos and the Americans, trying to retain their land, access to resources, buffalo and so forth. And then the Americans were fighting the Tejanos to take land and from the Spanish and then try to increase a buffer with Mexico. So there was a lot of controversy in that location. Interestingly, when we look at the two dichotomies there between how Texas kind of handled their expansion versus Oregon and California looking to become part of a community and grow with the community in that way. Interestingly, Oregon and California were a multicultural basis and actually were more oriented to the way of the northeastern side of the continent, whereas Texas really wanted to just stake their dominance and was more in the way of the South in that component. What really jumped out to me about a lot of these concepts is here we are now in an environment where there is a significant push to work from home and push to work where you like and how you like. And that's definitely a difference from where we were at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So it's interesting to see that we're coming full circle here. Another interesting component is a distinctive push for DE&I and recognizing that it does take everybody and everybody brings something different to the table. It just struck me that these components that we often think of established and taken care of and set in place after things like migrant expansion and expansion out through the western part of the country and the Industrial Revolution and so forth. These are still issues that are current today. And I wonder if we took more of a time to learn about our history, would we make some of the same mistakes, or would we embrace some of these changes a little bit better as a country as a whole? Just something very interesting that I found. Thank you.